family tree here right at Margaret's and Ted's house.
Lost his father at the age of 3.
Your father lost his father when he was 3?
Yeah, my grandfather died at the age of 3.
So my grandfather lost his father. Okay, yeah.
Now oh, you talking already?
Yeah.
Now, my grandfather was Polish. He lived in Poland.
Yeah, that's my great-grandfather. No, yeah, your grandfather, yeah.
And my grandmother was Hungarian. They lived in Hungary.
Yeah.
And after her husband died, my grandfather, it's your great-grandfather, she moved back to Hungary. Now, very little is known about that part of the family.
I see.
And in fact is, my father was very interested to know something about his father, so he inquired about people, his countrymen from Poland, to find. He found a very old man, and he advised him to write a letter to Poland, to a very old man over there. And all he was able to come across with him was that my great-grandfather was some kind of an official in Poland in the court system. He wasn't a lawyer because he was one allowed to.
And Margaret is here too, talking. Yeah. Yeah, no, I just wanted to, nothing. I just wanted to, so when my kids listen to this, they know.
In Poland, the Jews were restricted to what they were able to do because they were persecuted. He couldn't get an official diploma. He was a self-educated man, and he did receive a letter, some kind of a document that was in the courts in Poland. So he got that document, and he of course, he compensated all these people for going through their trouble. And that letter was here in the United States. After my father died, I gave that letter to an aunt, my father's sister. And what happened to it after, I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
it got lost.
So now,
on my father's side, from her mother's side, his mother's side rather, we have some something, some kind of a, how do you call it? You call it in Hebrew, say that I often, letter of yichus. How do you say yichus in English? Heritage, let's say. That's the closest thing I can think of. And that I have here a book from my great-grandfather. It was called the Rebduvat Feigelis, and he was he was considered a saint. In fact, even not a prophet.
That's your great-grandfather?
My great-grandfather.
So it'll be my great-great-grandfather.
Yeah. In fact, today, even people today, the city of Ungvar, where he lived.
What country was that again?
Well, originally it was Hungary. Then it was Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And now it's Russia.
Say his name more clearly. Say his name.
Rebduvat Feigelis.
Okay.
Now, even today, under Russian control, his place of burial is considered a holy place, and even people today go there when they have problems to ask for help. They pray on his grave. He was a descendant of the Shluch HaKodesh. He was the 9th generation. The Shluch HaKodesh was known as a very holy man, and he had comments on the Torah.
Now the Shluch, as I understand when I talked to Arnie, is buried in Tiberias next to Maimonides.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, here in fact, I have here, this if you want, I can give it to you. I have another copy of it. I don't know if it's going to do you much good because it's all in Hebrew, and it's not very clear. It has here, you see, all these marks.
Yeah.
But he goes back, he goes back up to one of the Tanoim, we call them in English. The Tanoim were the ones who are put together the Talmud. And he was one of the great rabbis.
What's his name?
Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. I can write it out in English for you.
Yeah, now, how
And his,
is he your great or how?
oh, I don't know how that goes back to, I don't know, maybe 1,000 or more years.
Oh, I see.
And his burial is also in Israel.
What about the one in Russia? How far back does he go?
The Polish, I don't know whether.
500 years?
You're talking about my grandfather's father's side. That's from Poland.
Like the guy I thought you said was buried, the one who was buried.
No, well, he's in Russia now. That's the continuation of his.
How long ago was he? The one who people go to his grave to bury. How long ago was he?
Well,
They go to his grave to pray for help.
about 150 years. Between 120 to 150 years. Maybe less. My father would be today 94. My father knew him. In fact, he was brought up by Reb David Feigeler. He was brought up by his grandfather. It's less.
What kind of things did he do why people regarded him as a saint?
Well, first of all, he took care of a lot of the poor people. He used to have the rich people used to come to him and give him money, and he should use his discretion to give it to. And in the sense, he was a great scholar. He was also a great scholar. And they also tell wonders about him, how he helped heal people. And if he gave, if anybody had any requests as far as health or other problems, they came to him for advice and blessings. So he's the descendant of this Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler was buried in Miran, Israel. The last time I visited Israel, I went with my wife, also went with my granddaughter Rochaleah, and we visited the grave of Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, which is also sanctified. People also go to that to pay respect for him today, even if it's thousands of years before it happened.
So he was buried a few thousand years ago?
Yeah. He's one of the great scholars that helped.
And he's our ancestor.
Yeah, he's the one he was the one. He was one of the scholars who were let me say who were put together. How would you say that?
To put together, compiled.
He was one of the scholars who is mentioned in the, as I said before, in the Talmud, and he was one that helped put together the laws that's mentioned in the Talmud. And his point of view, was very much listened to, and people saw it. Saw it as it was.
What?
How far further can I go?
I don't know.
Isn't that far enough?
2,000 years.
Yeah.
Oh, you told me what.
The in-betweens is hard for me to know. I have a list that I gave you. I also have another book I can show you up to the Shloh HaKodesh, but it's all in Hebrew. It's Hebrew lettering, and it's not too easy maybe to understand.
Yeah.
And this Reb David Feigeler, by the way, this book that in the back of it, one of our family is the one who made a reproduction of the book that he wrote. And back of it, he put down the list of the family, like a family tree. It's only partly up to 9 generations. See, now, of course, you want to know?
Yeah.
Of course, you want to know my grandmother. My grandmother, who was a daughter to this, my father's mother was a granddaughter to this Reb David Feigeler. He was named. Usually, they say, like Reb David Feigeler. Reb David was his name. Feigeler was his mother, and the reason they call him the son, which means that the son of Feigeler. The reason they call her on his mother's side rather than his father, because his father had died at an early age, and he was known. This Feigeler was also known as a very sainted woman.
What kind of things did she do?
Well, she, if she didn't do any more than raise a son like that, she already did enough. But she was known. She was known for all her good deeds. What a righteous woman should do. Mm-hmm. Would you want to see the other book that I should?
Yeah, I don't know Hebrew, but I'd like to. One thing I want to ask you before you get it. Wait a minute. Before you get up, You told me before our name used to be Cypress.
Oh, well, that's from my father's side. And so my father's side, the original name was Tribus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the name was changed because also they had the Jews had to go through a lot of how do you say yeah, they had to go through a lot of persecutions and they had to wander from one to one and very often they had to hide their identity. And when they came to a new place, they changed their name. The reason they changed it to Singer, which means singing, is because he was a cantor. So he took the name Singer because he was singing. The fact is that in his mother's side, his name was also changed. Originally, it was Horowitz. The Shloh HaKodesh first name, his family name was Horowitz. It was also changed to Kraus. Kraus means wandering around. And they had to do a lot of wandering because of the Jewish persecutions against Jews. And they wandered from country to country, so they called themselves Kraus, which in German, or even in Yiddish, means wandering. You're going in circles like. That's the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now let me show you the book.
What's this?
Reb Dovid Feigeler. That's my great grandfather.
I see, on your father's side.
My father's son. My
So
grandfather's
he wrote this
father.
book.
And here in the back, this is someone in our family named Perlstein. He had it reprinted.
What is this book about?
No, this is actually it's more. First of all, it's on Tehillim, on Psalms.
Sounds? Psalms.
Psalms.
Oh, Psalms.
And
Is
in
it an interpretation of the
in the
song?
back here is some letters from his son. In the very back, there's some stories here about things that the wonders of Dovid Feigeler is what he accomplished. It's all in Hebrew. This was added on. This was added on by this fellow Perlstein,
Mm-hmm.
who is a relation of ours. And in the back here, you have here
I'm going back.
Dovid Feigeler. Then he got here. He was the first Hasidic man who ever came to Ungvar. And he was a son of Reb Shmuel Chassid from Ungvar. Reb Shmuel Chassid was a son of Reb Gedalia Chenchowitz, who was a son of Reb Dovid from Uyhel at the city in Hungary. And one time was a son of Reb Yosef. He was the rabbi in the Posen, which was, I believe it was Germany. And he was the son of his father, who also was a rabbi there.
Is it through your father's side? Now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mother's side. And who was in
Your father, mother's side? Which one?
my grandmother's side.
Oh, your grandmother's side.
Yeah.
Oh, your father's mother.
So,
I see.
and he was also there goes back a few with him who were also old rabbis in Posen. Then they got another rabbi from Shapshatel. And he was the son of the Marshal. Marshal was also one of the commentaries on the Torah. And he in turn was a son of the Shloh HaKodesh I already mentioned before. My grandmother was the daughter. And it goes back, of course, I already told you. Okay, that's that part. And the Shloh HaKodesh goes all the way up to the Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. Okay?
What's that? Say it again.
Well, I have to start again. My father, after he lost his father, my grandmother was a widow for many years. And she brought up 4 sons who were all very great scholars. You didn't know, I don't think you know any one of them. And after being a widow, she married off her first son. She married, and my mother's, here I have to go back, it may be complicated. My grandmother had died. My mother's mother had died, and my grandfather from my mother's side was a widower. So my grandmother's father married my father's mother. Now you understand that part?
I think so, yeah.
After they were married, each one had their own child from previous marriages. They decided that their children should marry.
So it was an arranged marriage.
It wasn't arranged because they liked their I suppose they liked each other and they were satisfied with their yichus, how do you say yichus, with their background, and they married off. After they married,
That's your father and mother.
my father
Half
and
mother
mother.
and sister.
Yeah, that's your grandparents.
Yeah,
In other words, they weren't blood relations, but they were stepsisters.
yeah, stepbrother and sister. Yeah,
You understand it?
I understand. Yeah.
My mother, of course, lost her mother. She was at an early age too. And I know her mother's maiden name was Steinmetz. My mother's maiden name was Farkas. My grandfather was a great businessman. He used to buy forests and cut the trees, and they used to make lumber out of it. Out of the business. And my grandfather took it upon himself to raise the three remaining children that my grandmother had, the three sons. My grandfather from my mother's father was left only with one unmarried child, which was my mother. The other, his children were all married. And then after a while, my father was in Europe, and things there was hard financially. My father decided to come to America. Came to America. He was a rabbi here in many cities in America. He was in Oakland, California. Of course, Oakland, California that day was, I don't think Oakland is the same as it is today. It was a large Jewish population. He was rabbi in first position was Farrow, Pennsylvania. And from there he went to Oakland, and from there he came back to Woodlawn, Pennsylvania, which is now called Aliquippa. He was in Manchester, New Hampshire, Carbondale, Pennsylvania, Kearney, New Jersey, and I don't know. That's about it. He died at an early age of 47.
He had a heart attack.
Well, he never had a heart attack. What happened with him was this. He was invited to McKeesport, Pennsylvania, to take the position as a rabbi. On his way going to Pennsylvania, he took along all his documents, diplomas that he got as a rabbi, ordination papers. And on the way, he lost his attaché. It seems that he took it to heart. He never had any heart problem before. And he advertised in the papers, on radio. There was no television that time like it is now. And he wasn't able to get it. And in the synagogue in McKeesport, while performing services, got a heart attack, and they took him to Pittsburgh, which is the biggest city. And he got a heart attack, and 2 weeks later, against the doctor's advice, he came to New York because I was getting married, and he didn't want to disturb the thing, and we hadn't known anything what happened there. And he was at my wedding yet, and 5 days after I got married, he died. While he was in Pittsburgh, he had requested there that they bury him in the city of Farrow, Pennsylvania, because he did a lot of accomplishments there for Judaism there. He built a mikveh reticularum, which is called in English, and he set up the attendance of the Hebrew school from small Mount. Became a very big thing, and he felt he did accomplish a lot there, and he wanted to be buried there, but we didn't know all about it. And he's buried here in New York, in Queens, Mount Happy Cemetery.
Now, what I want to do is see this. Hold this to your mouth first. Okay, can you repeat that? What was her first name? Hani?
Honey.
H-A-N-I. She was
Hani.
Hani Krausinger. She was killed in the Holocaust?
She was killed in the Holocaust. She was already at the age over 90.
Okay. That's our great-grandmother on your father's side. And Singer, my great-grandfather was a lawyer?
Well, he wasn't a lawyer. He didn't have no diploma because the Jews at that time weren't. They couldn't get the secular education.
What was his
But he was a self-educated man. L-E-I-B.
L-E-I-B. How do you pronounce that? Leib?
Leib.
Leib, okay.
Leib is in
Okay.
Leib.
Okay, now, let's look at Grandma, on your mother's side, she came from the Farkas.
Yeah.
What was your grandfather's name? On your mother's side, your grandfather.
My mother's father, you mean?
Yeah.
Wolf. W-O-L-F.
W-O-L-F? And he owned the lumber company?
Well, he used to buy forests
Uh-huh.
and then cut them and produce them into lumber.
And his wife, your grandmother on your mother's side, what was her name?
Her name was Deborah. Deborah, I would say. Deborah.
Deborah. Okay.
You know the prophetess, Deborah?
Yeah, yeah.
Same name.
Okay. Now, next. Now, Deborah.
I don't know any further from there.
You don't know any further from
Yeah.
Farkas? You don't know anything up from there?
I know his father.
Okay, your great-grandfather on your mother's side. No, my great. Okay. Wolf Farkas. What
His
happened?
father's name?
Yeah,
His name was Jacob. Jacob Farkas.
Jacob Farkas.
Me.
What was Jacob? What did he do? What was his occupation?
He was a businessman. What business he was in, I don't know. But he did. I know that he had established a fund. He made a foundation for poor people in Israel, and he used to collect money and send money to Israel. He was head of it. He founded it and headed it. After he died, his son, who was my grandfather, took it over.
Wolf?
Yeah.
I see.
And after that, it was lost. Because nobody continued it.
You're great now. Jacob's wife, what was her name?
I don't know.
I see. Now, is that as far back as you know it?
Yeah, it's far back, I know.
Thank you. Okay, just,
Okay.
I'll hold it. You want me to hold it or you want to? I'll hold it. Okay.
No.
Okay, this is Aunt Margaret, and it's March 10th, 1980. Okay, so say what kind of a woman your mother was. Let's start with your mother and father, and then go back from there. Okay? Tell us about your mother.
Well, of course, I think she was great, but I don't know if it's true.
Yeah.
She was a good person. She was patient. She never got angry, that I know of. And she had 8 children that she loved. She was sorry she didn't have more. She always used to say to me. And she lived alone a lot. My father was away from her many, many years. But she survived. She raised us all. I think she did a pretty good job. And what else can I say? She came from a very comfortable home. Her father was quite well off. She was the youngest of, I don't know how many, 6 brothers she had and 1 sister. And this Rita Separate is her sister's daughter, the one you were just talking to. And when my grandfather died, he left her quite a bit of inheritance. My father got rid of that in no time at all. And that's when he came to America, my father. My mother was left at home with 7 children and 1 on the way. She, your mother.
Mm-hmm.
She was pregnant with your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 years after my father came to America in 1919. And in 1927, we all came. My father sent for us. We were 8 of us. Your mother didn't even know her father.
Hmm.
She didn't want to go near him. She was afraid of him. She wasn't used to seeing a man. In the house we had the 2 boys. They were young kids. And I don't know. I never felt that I was underprivileged or I didn't have what I needed. Mm.
So she
Well,
had the candy store? What did she do?
My mother didn't have a candy store. My mother,
Grocery.
grocery store. That was after my father died.
I see.
And she remarried to Stein. You remember him.
Uncle, yeah.
He helped her raise the rest of the children. My father died very young. He was 47. And she was left with 5 children in the house. They were all in school. She remarried, and this man helped her work in the store, and they all graduated school. And my brother went to law school, you know that. And then they gave up the store. My mother was sick by then. She had high blood pressure and heart condition. He don't know. I don't know how many years later Uncle Stein died. I think they lived about 14 years they lived together.
Mm-hmm.
Then he died. My mother was left alone. Well, she always lived alone. She was very happy with him, with his second husband.
I'm glad.
She was very happy. He was very good to her. He loved my mother's children. And when he died, your mother was crying so hard that he had his son at the funeral, and he asked somebody who that is crying for his father. And when I told him that's one of his stepchildren, he was really amazed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my brother Louis, every year, we have yard sides.
Every year?
A memory, like when the dead dies, every year.
Yeah.
We light a candle and we say a certain prayer, Kaddish.
Yes, yes.
So my brother says it for him every year.
Mm.
That's how devoted we were,
Yeah.
And I don't know, my mother lived, I think, about 6 years without him, and then she died.
How was she towards the end? Was she still going?
She was a sick woman.
She was sick at the end?
She was a sick woman for about 20 years. She was sick.
Oh, yeah.
She had high blood pressure and heart condition.
That's a picture of her mother, my grandmother.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, and that's my grandfather.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, why didn't know?
My mother went through a lot. She had a tough life.
Yeah.
But she was never bitter or resentful. I used to marvel at her.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I think she was my hero.
Yeah.
Because I knew the kind of a house she came from. Her father was very comfortable. He was a businessman.
Yeah.
You see, you always hear stories about my father's family.
And that was Farkas?
Farkas. But you never hear stories about my mother's family. My mother's family is a different type of family. They weren't quite as, what shall I say, educated or cultured.
Mm-hmm.
They were business people. And they were comfortable. They were more comfortable than my father's family. And then when my her father remarried when my mother was 15 years old. And my father's mother remarried. My father was the youngest son. He was 16 years old.
Mm.
See? So my father used to be away in school to yeshiva. Like now they send children out of town, to school. But my grandmother had 4 sons, and all of them went to yeshiva. After the time they got married, they studied the Talmud. They were very educated people, the Talmud. So my mother and my father were stepsisters and brothers, of course not from the same parents.
Yeah, yeah.
And they married. My mother was 19, my father was 20 when they got married. See? So when I had other cousins, I always used to say that my grandmother is a double grandmother to me.
Yes, sir.
I adored my grandparents because I was raised by my grandparents. I didn't know my parents till I was about 6 years old. I didn't even know my father.
So why don't you talk about your father now, the kind of man he was?
My father was a very cultured, very outstanding. I don't think I ever met, of course I'm not such a big person to meet too many people, but I don't think I met another person like my father ever. He was just great. He was so great that he never made anybody feel below him.
Isn't that beautiful?
Did I express myself right?
Yeah.
That's how big a man he was.
Yes, that's being big.
That's a man. He used to, if somebody would come in like a, common person, and he would sit and talk to him, you would think that they're on the same level. And that's to me a big person.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Never made you feel that, listen, you're not as good as I am.
Yes.
He was a great man. He really was.
Selfish.
Very unselfish. Very unselfish. Very unselfish.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think that's why maybe he died so young, 47 years old.
And you mentioned he was a rabbi.
Well, he was a rabbi here in America. He really didn't care for that kind of a profession. That was not his cup of tea. Because you had to cater to people. And you had to be what you are, you don't want to be. In fact, he left many, many positions because he didn't want to,
So that kosher food, the animal has to be killed in a way that won't hurt, that minimize the pain.
I see. That's
And
beautiful.
plus certain prayers. Well, he, in addition to being a rabbi, did that. By the way, this is March 1980, and it's Aunt Margaret speaking.
So my father used to kill animals, for slaughter. You have certain knives. They have to be so sharp that they tested on a hair. Did you know that a hair is very tough to cut? The knife has to be perfect, and you have to feel your hand is not too tired in order to kill an animal. And my father used to do that, but he really never liked it. Never liked it. It was just against him. In fact, my mother used to tell a story. I don't remember it. I was very young. That he once came home and he said, this is it. He will not kill another animal. He's giving up his job. The little lamb cried just like a baby.
Yeah.
And then he put down his knives and he says, that's it. He never wanted to be that kind of a rabbi again.
Beautiful.
No, he does very soft. Very soft heart.
You know what Abdul Baha says about we must have more compassion for the animal than for people because they cannot cry and tell. They cannot go for justice. We must have more love for them than we have really, more consideration for them than even for people because they can't attend to themselves.
It's hard even to kill a fly. I know, I find it hard.
So what else did about your father, about him? My mother said sometimes he was always taking people for the Shabbos.
Oh, well, that's a very common thing in our religion.
They want to talk about
It's a very common thing to always have guests in your house, to give guests your, be hospitable to the people who need to, need to have a home or need to have a meal. In fact, my grandmother, I could tell you a story about my grandmother, because I lived with my grandmother. She used to, in the middle of the night, people used to come into town and they didn't have where to sleep. They used to come to my grandmother, knock at the window to let them in. From the shul, they send them to my grandmother. And I would stay my grandmother's. My grandmother would come in the middle of the night, wake me up, and tell me to go sleep on the couch because somebody else has to sleep in my bed. And I used to say, well, why can't somebody else sleep on the couch? I mean, I'm sleeping in my bed. She says, that's not the way we do things. We give the guests the best in the house. And the poorer, the more better they treat them. Because you want to give them honor, you shouldn't feel degraded.
Right.
So I used to have to give up my bed, and I didn't like it, I tell you the truth. And then my grandmother had another thing going. Every Friday, she used to give me food, like what she prepared for the Sabbath. She would give me food and some money, and she would tell me to go and deliver it to a certain widow woman or a poor woman, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody about it. I was not allowed to say anything.
No.
When you do a deed, you are not allowed to talk about it, because as soon as you tell people about it, it's not a good deed anymore.
That's right. You should not let your left hand know what your right hand do.
That's the way I was taught in my house, in my mother's
What
family.
about what your father, did your father do this too? What you talk about what he did?
But my father was not home very much. You see, my father came to America when I was 12 years old. Your mother was not even born. So how much could I know about my father, really?
My mother would say a lot of times she would wake up on the floor that they'll see why they bring somebody home to be in the bed,
Yeah, probably, but that was your mother's side. I probably was not in the house anymore. I got married very young. Well, we slept in your mother's house on the floor, too. People used to step all over us and leave it down. You don't remember? Oh, God. He used to have such a wonderful... His mother had a house, a small house, the first house she ever had. And we used to get together in the summertime, and we used to sleep on the floor, outside on the porch, all over. Whoever got up in the middle of the night had to watch out. You shouldn't step on somebody. And his mother and I would sleep on the porch, on the space lounge, and the milkman would come and see us sleeping there. He used to get hysterical. Oh, but we had loved it. We loved every minute of it.
Sure.
His mother did the same thing. It's not such a big to us. I mean,
Yeah.
look at Joycey. Look at what Joycey does.
Go like... Well, I've got some time. I want to take some more. I want to take another 20 minutes. I want to
I
get
think Louis informed you pretty well about my father's family.
Well, somewhat, but I like to hear you're the tribus. Do you know anything about the tribus, that whole thing?
No, my brother discovered that. I didn't even know anything about it. I used to hear my grandmother telling us that she traced our family back to King David.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Yeah, my grandmother used to tell me that.
Well, what do you know?
And my grandmother used to say to me that we come from a very great family. And you should remember this. This I remember. If you see other people do certain things and nothing happens to them, God does not punish them. That doesn't go for you. You cannot do those things.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to do things what other people do. You have to be careful what you're doing.
Beautiful.
She used to scare me, though. I used to be scared. It was very scary. My grandmother always said that to me. You know what? We had a grandfather. Louis probably told you about this great-grandfather that we had. He was a great man. He performed miracles. I don't know what you would call him.
What
People still go to his grave.
What's his name again?
David Fageless.
Oh, yeah.
That means David, like Frida's named after the grandmother. Like David Frida's David, I would say. Why they call him that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But their second name was Krause.
Mm-hmm. What kind of miracles did he do?
I don't know. People want to remember certain things, but he performed miracles. He never slept in a bed. He never slept in a bed.
Sleep on the floor?
He slept mostly standing up, studying the Talmud. He just did all kinds of stories you wouldn't even believe. He had swollen feet and terrible, I could imagine. And his wife used to be in the business. They were in the textile business. They were not poor people. And his wife would make him put on a coat. They would buy him a winter coat. And he would go to temple and come home without a coat. He would take off his coat and give it to somebody who didn't have it.
Sounds just like Abba Bahad.
Yeah.
That's the way Abba Bahad.
He would take off his coat. Well, my father used to do things like that.
Yeah.
I remember my mother telling stories about my father was traveling in a train, and the salesman came over to him, and he was, talking, and he says, business is very bad. It's before Passover. He has a big family, and he didn't make enough money to have, for the holidays. And my father says, well, what are you selling? And he showed him some material that he was selling. And my father went ahead and bought a whole yard goods. You know, you had the yard goods just rolled up on a roll. And he brought it home. And my mother said to him, well, what am I going to do with all that? It's all the same material. He says, well, what do you think? What do I care what you're going to do? This man needed money for the holidays. And he bought it. And at other times I used to hear my mother say, my father was a book collector.
Huh?
He was a very learned man.
Okay, thank you.
It's all fixed?
How do we fix it that quick?
He put some lotion in it.
Oh,
Some fluid. Yeah. All right, so anyway, so my mother used to get annoyed many times, the things that my father would do.
Yeah.
Because after all, she had children and she had to run a house.
Yeah.
And my father would start, he was a book collector, my father. He had books, collections that were worth a lot of money. My mother sold a lot of them when we came to America. But Louis has a lot of my father's books, and Sam. And my father would take, before the holidays, he would pick out books and have it rebound, His books always were just so. And my mother says, why do you have to do this before the holiday? I need money, for extra money. He says, well, how do you think the person needs the money too? The man needs money to prepare for the holidays. So he would do that. My father would do these things, It was a wonderful thing to do, but my mother was very annoyed many times with this whole thing.
Yeah, mother.
My mother was a practical woman.
Yeah. She loved her family.
She loved her family. She had a lot of children, and we always had strangers in the house coming for dinners. We always had a big family. We always had big apartments, big places we lived in. Mm-hmm. It's like a dream. Like sometimes don't remember. I don't remember very much. It's maybe because I don't want to remember my childhood. I had a wonderful childhood.
Wonderful what?
I had a very, very good childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Very happy. Very happy. I think I was always happy, really. I never felt that I didn't have what I wanted. My Jerry always said that about me. No matter how much I had, Lillian, I always felt I had enough.
Yes.
I never was in want.
Yeah, that's the way.
Because when I can't buy something, I don't even want it.
Yeah, that's the way with me. I just don't want all these.
Look, I was a widow for 6 years.
Yeah.
My husband left me penniless.
Yeah.
Penniless,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
If I would tell you.
Yeah.
I don't want to
No.
cry to you or anything. I didn't starve because of my family.
Yeah.
And yet, I was never unhappy.
No.
And people used to ask me, and I said, I don't know, I feel so secure. I have such a wonderful family. That was my security. I never worried about it.
No.
I didn't have an income like Frida has. I had nothing. And literally, I made $48 a week. I worked in a 5 and 10. And I used to just take that money and go and buy food.
Now, do you know anything about, let's see, is it on your father's side that this saint?
So, yeah, my father's side.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
my father's side.
Anything more about his side?
Well, I don't really know too much.
Mm-hmm.
My father left to come to America. We were very young.
Right.
And he was here 6 years in this country.
Mm.
That we had no contact with him. Just mail, right?
Mm.
Then we came here, and I was here maybe a year, and I got married.
I see. So you can't say too much about
I
that. So why don't you
can't
talk more
say-
about your mother's side then? Yeah.
On my mother's side, I don't know what I could tell you.
You knew your grandmother and your grandfather.
Well, this grandmother that I knew was my father's mother.
Oh, it was your father's mother.
My father's mother, and the grandfather was married to my father's mother. It's my mother's father. They were sisters and brothers, stepsisters and brothers.
Oh, your grandparents were stepsisters.
Yeah,
And then your parents were stepsisters and brothers too, weren't they?
My parents.
Your parents were stepbrothers and sisters?
Yeah.
And then your grandparents were stepbrothers?
No,
Oh, okay.
no.
Now, so what about your grandfather?
You mean my mother's father?
Yeah.
He was a businessman.
There's the trees or something?
No. He used to deal with lumber.
Yeah, lumber, yeah.
Oh, he was a big businessman. He had his own train, and he used to deal with barons. Barons used to own the land, forests. And he used to rent the forests. See, and he had his own train going into the forest for the lumber, and then take it to the mill to make furniture. He was a rich man, my grandfather, mother's father. He left my mother quite a bit of estate. And this Frida Seppin, they just called, that's my mother's sister's daughter. See, she only had one sister and about 6 brothers. I only knew about 2 of her brothers. They died very young. You know, our family died young. But Frida Saffron's mother, I remember, and I have a very bad memory of her that I never even mentioned it to my sisters. It's a funny thing with me. If something is very unpleasant, I never talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'll tell it to you because you really want to know. There were 2 sisters. My mother was the youngest. My mother was 13 years old when her mother died.
How old?
13. 13. She was the youngest of I don't know how many children. And my grandfather, he was a very modern person. He sent her away to finishing school in Europe. Imagine in those days.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you.
So your mother went to a finishing school?
Yes, right. Because she had no mother and he couldn't take care of her. So he sent her to a school. And in Europe, that is only, who goes there, like really high-class people.
That would be a Jewish school, huh?
No. My mother learned Hungarian. She was well educated.
Really?
Oh yeah. So what happened was, my mother had one sister. See, the sister was much older than my mother. In fact, her children were almost as old as my mother. See? But I remember when I was a little girl after my grandfather died, my mother and her sister had a terrible fight. And I remember like now, what happened, my grandfather left my mother more estate than his other daughter. Because my mother was the youngest.
Okay.
And she was married to his wife's son. And they had less than the other sister. The sister had property in her own right, so she was not poor.
Yeah.
So he felt that my mother needed it more than the other. I mean, that's the way I figure.
Yeah.
Because he left my mother half of the estate and the other half to her sister and brother. And her sister was very, very angry, very jealous, and I remember like now. And I wouldn't even tell it to her own daughter. I mean, I never would talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not proud of this at all.
No.
And I remember her hitting my mother, really hitting her physically.
Yeah.
And I was just a little girl. You can imagine
Oh.
that it's in my head. Many times I think about it, Arnie, and I never mentioned it to a soul. Why, I don't know. It bothered me so much.
Yeah.
And this Frida Saffron, a lot of my mother's family were killed during the Nazi.
They were what?
They were killed during the war,
Okay.
like the Nazi.
Yeah.
This Frida Saffron was in concentration camp. My husband and I sponsored her. We brought her out to this country after the war.
Yeah.
See, after the war, they took her out of a concentration camp and they brought her to Sweden in the hospital because they were in very, very bad condition.
Yeah.
And then we sponsored her. She came to this country, Frida Saffron, the one you just talked to. So we sent her car fare, and then she wrote to us. She spent the car fare. She lost it. She was gambling it. She was buying something. She lost the money. So my husband, I told you my husband was a very good man. He was very good-natured, Max. He would give his last shirt off his back, really. And he sent her fare again to come here. And many times when I really needed the money, she wanted to pay me, and I never let her because I said, if you pay me back, it's not a good deed anymore. It's not.
No.
I says, please don't do that.
Yes.
Everything is taken away from me. The few little things that I did do, I don't want to lose that.
No,
So she never, and I never let her, I never let her talk about it because
Now, when you say our family died young,
young, very
do any of you live old?
Pardon me?
Do any of our family live old on your side?
I only think my grandmother lived till 83 or so, in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
And she was killed during World War II. I told you she was killed during the air raid.
I see.
Louis says she was killed by the Nazis. No.
I see.
And how did we know she was killed? In fact, she died after my father. My father died before her.
So she lived into her 80s. Now, who else?
I think so.
Who else lived old?
I know my mother's father died in the 60s.
Who else lived?
He had diabetes, I want you to know. You know that? Did you know that?
Your mother's father?
Uh-huh.
No, I didn't.
Had diabetes. This means it's good to know that, right?
Yeah.
He had diabetes. He didn't eat bread. I remember he used to get cheese. He used to get like the Swiss cheese, the round, loaf of cheese. And he used to slice that, eat it instead of bread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So who else?
And who else? My mother's mother died very young, too. She was only 13 when her mother died.
What did she die of?
I really don't
How
know.
old was she?
I have no idea. My mother never talked much about it. I don't know. I know she was 13 when her mother died,
Yeah.
and her father sent her away to school.
Yeah.
That much I know.
How old was your grandfather? How old was your grandfather when he died?
My mother's father,
Yeah.
I think he was in his 60s.
What did he die of? Diabetes?
Well, he didn't die of diabetes. You always get
Your grandparents.
my father's.
Oh, no, your great grandparents. Did you know your great grandparents?
Never even heard my mother talk about that. I don't know why.
She never talked of her grandparents.
She didn't remember much because her mother died when she was 11.
I see.
13. She was away in school, and then her father remarried when she was about 15.
Mm-hmm.
No, she never talked about it. I only remember her sister.
And what did your mother die of?
My mother had high blood pressure, heart condition. She died under the operating table.
And your father died of a heart attack?
Yeah. But in those days, they didn't have so many things as they have now. Heart attack. Yeah. The third heart attack he had, he went. First heart attack he had, he was in the middle of performing services. The temple. No, that's the way it goes.
Is there anything else that my children should know about their heritage? Because a lot of this is so my children will have it. I'll also give this probably one to Jackie, maybe one to Steve Tobias,
Oh, yeah?
if I get to make them up. But I want my children to have it. Is there anything that my children should know
I don't know what else to tell you.
that they should know about their heritage?
I know my parents came to this country when my father came first, you know that.
Yeah.
He wanted to come to America before that, but my grandfather wouldn't allow him to come to America. Because a lot of people came to America, they were running away from something. For something or another.
Is that right?
Sure.
Like what? What would they be?
Committed some.
Yeah, leave on.
I mean, they committed some something that wasn't right.
And they escaped to here.
They escaped here, or they're very poor, and they went to seek for their fortune. And my grandfather was very comfortable. He didn't want his children to come to America. So after my grandfather died, that's when my father came to America.
I see.
1919.
When you say your father, your mother had a big inheritance, and your father spent it?
Well, I would say so.
How did he spend
I would say.
He gave it away or what?
I gave it away, went in business and was not successful.
I see.
I would say so.
What kind of business?
Bought books, maybe. Who knows?
I see.
My father was in the printing business. Do you know my father was a printer?
No, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
He was a rabbi?
Well, he went to yeshiva till he was 20, see? And he got his title. He wasn't really going to be a rabbi.
I see.
A lot of people could be rabbis. They have the, title. All of these Lubavitchers have titles of rabbis, but they don't practice to be a rabbi. They go into business. My father didn't want to be a rabbi. He had the education. In Europe, he was not a rabbi.
I see. So back in those days, you could be a rabbi without going to theological school.
Oh no. You have to have a certain, they call it I don't know how to call it. You have to have a certain amount of education.
I see.
Not everybody, no.
I see.
Oh no. Look at, Arnie Singer, Louis' son, could be a rabbi if he wants to. He has the education.
I see.
I mean, you go for something and you don't practice it. My father didn't want to be a rabbi.
I see.
When he got married, my grandfather put him in business. They had a printing business and stationery.
Mm-hmm.
See?
It didn't work out.
But it didn't work out because my father was not a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody likes to give away like he does and believes everything, you cannot be in business. Okay? He was too good.
Mm-hmm.
Plain talk. So then he finally figured, well, all right, I'll be a rabbi. He hated it. He did not like it.
Didn't like being a rabbi.
No.
Who printed that book he wrote? Did he print
He
that
did.
book? Oh,
Well, he didn't print it, no. He had it. He was not in the printing then.
Oh, somebody else published it.
Yeah, I was only in printing in Europe after he was finished his schooling. He went to yeshiva till he was 20.
I see.
He didn't do any work. He had no profession, nothing else. All his brothers. My grandmother was a widow, and all her children went to study.
Where did she have her money from to do that?
Well, you heard the story. She became a widow. She was 29 years old. She was left with 4 sons.
Uh-huh.
My father was the youngest. He was 3 years old.
Uh-huh.
And she left Poland. She came back to Hungary.
Uh-huh.
And how could she make a living to support 4 children? Okay?
Yeah.
Of course, she could have accepted charity, but she didn't want that.
Uh-huh.
She learned how to sew.
I see.
And people who knew her used to give her work, so just so she could make a living.
I see.
And she used to do sewing. Then she, I think, went into business. She had a store. She supported her 4 sons. She didn't get married till all her sons were grown.
Yeah.
My father was 16. She said she doesn't want any man to support her children.
I see.
And she gave them an education. I mean, I know my husband, Max, used to, he learned a trade when he was 11. And his father, but my family, you didn't do things like that. You had to have your education.
I see. So she sent them by herself to
Sure.
from sewing and having her store?
Well, they went to yeshiva. It didn't cost that much,
I see.
you see. And then they used to, how shall I say, see, when you're in the yeshiva, you go and eat at each person's different days. Doesn't cost any money,
I see.
see? Because we used to have boys like that too, when we lived before we came to America.
I see.
See, if a boy is in, let's say in your city, and he goes to school to yeshiva, and they're going to tell you, would you like to have a boy once a week to come to your house to eat? You will not say no, would you?
No, I see.
Well, there are a lot of people like that.
I see.
And that's how my grandmother sent all her boys to school.
I see. And that's how your father got his education. What happened to his brothers? What happened to his...
They all went there, had an
What happened
education.
after that? Whether they get killed in the concentration camp?
Well, yeah, but you know Joe Singer,
Yeah,
your cousin?
yeah.
That's his father was my father's brother.
I see.
He was killed by the Nazis.
I
Whole
see.
family.
And what about the other 2 brothers?
And the oldest brother was also killed in an air raid during the war.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2. And one brother died here in this country. He's buried not far from where I'm going to be. And my father, that's all.
Well, what about that brother? What did he do when he was in this country?
He was a rabbi.
Oh, he was a rabbi?
Yeah. He was a rabbi because he has no other
And what did the others
knowledge.
do? Were they rabbis?
The other ones, they were rabbis.
I see.
They were all rabbis.
So a lot of people become
They
rabbis.
were rabbis, and also the oldest one married a rich girl, and the father-in-law left him a business, like a general store or whatever you would call it.
Did people become rabbis who couldn't make it in business? Is that what happened in a lot of...
No. See, like our family, all the boys went to yeshiva. They had to have a certain amount of study.
Right.
And they had enough study, they could be a rabbi. See? So if they had no other means or no other thing, they'd go be a rabbi. But a lot of them didn't become rabbis. And here in this country, it's the same thing. You know, where I live, they have these Lubavitchers movement, and they're very religious, and they're business, they make good money. Some of them are very wealthy. And some are rabbis, a struggle.
Mhm.
That's all.
Mhm.
Just the way it is.
So what do you see as the main, let me talk about your brothers and sisters for a minute. What do you see as the main accomplishment of Uncle Sam in his lifetime? You know, your brother Sam, what was his,
My brother
yeah,
Sam?
what would you say is his main accomplishment in life? If you were to say, this is what my brother accomplished as a person, what's it?
I'm going to tell you something. I think it's very sad about my brother Sam. My brother Sam deserved better than he had. I think he's a very unhappy person.
Okay, but what would you say?
The only thing,
accomplishments? Let's look at
the
positive, 'cause that's
big
people-
accomplishment,
yeah.
that he has a son who's a lawyer,
Uh-huh,
that he enjoys his, he's proud of him.
uh-huh.
What else does he have? You tell me.
Okay. Now, Louis, what would you say is his main accomplishment? Your brother Louis.
Joycey.
Okay. What would you,
Joycey is his main accomplishment.
okay. What would you say is Aunt Frida's main accomplishment in life? Whatever you can think of as the main accomplishment.
It's a hard thing to say. Her good deeds.
Her good deeds.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about Aunt Gloria's main accomplishment in life?
It's another hard one, you know that?
Okay.
Her son. She's very disappointed. All right, her son.
Okay. And then what would you say is Aunt Lily's main accomplishment in life?
Her sons.
Mhm.
She's happy.
Mm-hmm. And I think about my mother. What would you say her main
Your
accomplishment
mother?
in life? Yeah.
Let me see. Well, I think by helping your father all her life. Really mean it.
Mm-hmm.
That's her biggest accomplishment. He would have never be what he is without her. I feel that.
Yeah. Did I cover everybody?
Me? Are you asking me?
What was your main accomplishment? You're the speaker. What was your main accomplishment in life? What do you feel your main accomplishment?
I'm very sorry to say I didn't accomplish too
No,
much.
what would you say was your main accomplishment?
My main accomplishment was to raise 3 daughters that I think they're pretty nice people.
I see.
That's all.
Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And so that covers everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That covers everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay, this was Aunt Margaret, originally Aunt Margaret Scheckler, now Aunt Margaret School, and Grandma Lillian Gregory was here, talking some of the time too. So long. What would you say is the main accomplishment of your deceased sister, Elaine Fisher?
Her children, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
especially her 2 sons.
I
She
see.
died very young. She didn't have a chance to do very much with her life.